that's something I want to talk about. Who's responsible for putting these patients on so many freaking meds?
Because every patient deserves more than just a patch. They deserve a chance to recover.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eclipse Unscripted. I am your host, Dr. Leek, pain management physician here in Waxahachie, Texas. Today, we are happy to be joined by Jim Lewis. He is a pharmacist now for actually more than 40 years. He's been a pharmacist. And I think it's important to hear his point of view, especially since so much of what we do is in collaboration with a pharmacist of some kind. So I think it's important that we spend some time to get to know him, some of his experiences, and realize there's so much more that goes on behind a simple physician's prescription. There's teamwork involved, there's regulation involved, and there might even be a little conspiracy. But that being said, Jim, welcome to the program. Are you done yet, Jim?
No, this patient had 32 orders to review.
Oh my goodness.
32?
Yeah, that's some of the patients we get.
Now that's something I want to talk about. Who's responsible for putting these patients on so many freaking meds?
Well, I can tell you a lot of it goes all the way back, especially like with BP, to the step care approach to blood pressure management. I don't even know if you're aware of that because you're so much younger. But back in the day, it was a step care approach. You always put them on a thiazide. If that didn't work, then you go to the beta blocker, then you go to the others. That's why you end up with 4 or 5 blood pressure medicines on a patient. And, most docs have thrown that out the window now. But even recently with my wife, she was having problems with blood pressure on enalapril, and her doctor said, well, let's add amlodipine to it. And then she come home with that on both meds. And I'm like, why is he doing that? Why didn't you just DC the enalapril and, you can manage it with one drug. You don't have to do it with 2. If it doesn't do it effectively, then try something else. But anyway, I told her just stop the enalapril and tell your doctor later, and her blood pressure's been great. But 90% of patients wouldn't question that. They would just keep taking 2 blood pressure medicines, and there's really no justification to do it. So there's a lot of that kind of thing that happens. Not only, that's just a simple example, that's the easiest one for blood pressure, but it happens with other things as well. I mean, diabetes is the same thing. You just start stacking things on. You don't ever take anything off. Mm-hmm. And it's, then you wind up with this kind of situation here where you've got...
You know what? That's interesting because that was always my pet peeve with the players, because they would get hurt somewhere and then they'd come to me and then they had this long workout because they used to have these exercises, and they went to another guy and he added these exercises, and the other guy added these exercises. Next thing you know, they have I would say to them, you're doing the same thing 3 or 4 different times, right? Your workout is so redundant. You're just wasting your time. Mm-hmm. And so that's why
I'm sure that's true of exercise the same it is with meds. You can find studies all over the place. The more complicated the regimen is, or the more drugs you add to the regimen, the less compliant the patient is.
Exactly. That's exactly what I found.
Mm-hmm. And it's very real.
Yeah.
I always, my approach when I was in retail is always trying to simplify regimens wherever possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just because they're better being more compliant to a simpler regimen than being non-compliant to something that's complex. And you add all these factors into it. Then when you're trying to assess the patient, it's like, what is really going on? Do I know if they're taking it or not? How do you even figure it out?
Yeah.
It's insane.
And most of those guys and guys like that were always hurt. And they had the longest, most elaborate workouts, but they're always injured.
Wow.
Yeah, I know that's the same is true for gabapentin. They studied that sort of compliance regimen, and I mean, gabapentin is one of the most commonly prescribed pain medicines, nerve pain medicines, in the country. It's a safe medication, and everybody's on it. We often joke it should be in the water, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, like a third of people end up taking that like as prescribed. And but it's a 3, sometimes 4 times a day regimen, 2 to 3 pills each time. It's like, who can do that? It's like a meal of pills. Mm-hmm. That's just one medication.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, because like you like with my mom, she probably had like 10 or 15 pills that she had to take, Now, obviously, a younger person, maybe they can keep up with that, put it on the app on their phone. But older people, they're counting them out. They got them all over the counter. Do you know if it's just too confusing. I can't imagine trying to pop 10 or 12 pills 2 or 3 times a day.
They have a device now. I don't know, maybe you've seen this, but they're selling it in some higher end stores where it's a pill counter and it's got Monday through Friday and all that, but it's like linked to your phone app so that you can have it locked until it's time to open it for people that might need that little extra help. It's like, oh, that's cool. Maybe I could sell some of that in the clinic, but I was like, do I want to be associated with just pushing pills on everybody? Probably not.
Right.
That's a problem we're trying to get rid of, not, accommodate.
Not facilitate, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do a little bit of still do my logistics and stuff like that. I met with a client yesterday. He has just come out with a device for opioid patients. It's essentially looks like one of those little mini trash cans that sit in the corner. You can step on it, the lid comes up. It looks like that size, and basically what it does is it only opens and allows the drugs to come out at a certain time. And it's like a device, but it's filled with whatever your prescription is. If it's 60 pills, they're all in there, but the patient can only get them at whatever interval that the computer has for that patient. So he was saying that the Department of Defense had already ordered, hundreds of thousands of them because they feel like it could be a way to wean some off. Obviously not going to be an answer for everybody, but that might be something along those lines, with keeping control of what pills or.
Yeah. If the pharmaceutical company ever comes out and says, here's a way that you can take less medications, I'm probably going to doubt that.
Right.
It's going to cause a side effect, which requires another medicine,
It's
which
like, what's
requires
the
another
catch?
medicine.
There's got to be a catch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you see this patient's profile doesn't even fit on a single page. You've got to scroll down significantly to even get all of the orders. So that's something else that I see all the time right here in our little rehab hospital. What happens, a patient goes into the hospital, they've got their home med list, right? So they put the home med list into their system. Then, of course, they're showing up at the ER because whatever they're doing at home isn't working for them, right? You admit them to the hospital, they stay there a number of days, a week, however long it is, and now you've got internal medicine, you've got all these different specialist doctors that are tweaking their regimen, getting everything fixed so that they're stable medically, and then they're discharging them. And then what happens at discharge, a lot of times, and I see this all the time, they've got all of the meds that they have inpatient, and then they click this little button that says continue previous home meds. Guess what? Everything they were taking when they were at home just got ordered in addition to whatever they gave them there. And then you're trying to weed through this. There's therapeutic duplications there. There's, just a lot of unnecessary stuff that they stopped, and the hospital had a reason to stop it, and then they restart it. And I don't know why that happens exactly. I think they're just rushed in doing the discharges a lot of times. Or maybe they're assigning it to, someone under them, and they don't understand that. And then that's what we're left with. And then I'm going, why are they doing this? They wasn't giving them this med the whole time they were in the hospital, and now they got them stable, but now they want to start it back after they.
Right.
And so that leads to that. That's what, and it happens every time you're transferred from one facility to the other. It's crazy.
Yeah. Medication reconciliation is no joke. But I feel like if there's one thing that we can do for the patient when they're in the hospital, it's medication reconciliation, because you're right. I mean, they're talking about dozens of medications sometimes, and then they're getting sent out into the community, and is mom going to check in on you, or is your daughter going to check in on you? Like, how's that going to work?
Right.
Good luck.
Well, it doesn't, and they're landing back in the ER a few weeks later.
Yeah.
It's a cycle that happens.
Who's responsible for monitoring or filtering this for the patient? The patient himself, or?
It's kind of a team approach. Everybody's involved. I think primarily it falls on the doctors.
Okay.
And then, whoever works for the doctors, but obviously pharmacy plays a huge role in that. I mean, Jim saved my hide many times, looking at different things?
Well, you just have to review because, you have patients that go into the hospital. One person, anytime you're relying on humans to dictate things, or to enter, data entry or whatever, there's the potential for error. So that's why, we set up from a pharmacy perspective, like things that happen overnight or over the weekend when I'm not in the hospital. And then when I come in, then I'm taking whatever information we had that was brought in, the list of medications and whatnot, whatever records I can get a hold of, and then I'm doing a drug utilization review on admission for this is what's in the system, this is what the orders were supposed to be, and we find errors all the time. Hopefully we get it before it gets to the patient for too many doses, or hopefully none, but, no system is perfect. Even with that, you still can overlook things because one person put it in, the doctor does the reconciliation, they're looking at it too, right? Then they approve the orders, and then pharmacy has to verify them. So in that case, at night, our remote pharmacist from home would go over that, review the orders, verify them, bring up any issues that might be there. And then the next day, a pharmacist is doing the review. And even with all of that oversight, errors still occur. So you can imagine if you weren't doing all of that stuff, how many would get through.
So Jim, how long have you been a pharmacist now?
I've been a licensed pharmacist for 41 years. And, if you include intern and externships in school and whatnot, I've been working in the pharmacy since 1981. So
That's impressive.
started in the hospital, worked there for the first 2 years of my career, and then I moved back to my hometown into a retail pharmacy, and which was very interesting because I got to see everybody's parents of the kids that I grew up with come into the pharmacy and see what all kinds of medications they were on. And after 11 years of doing that, I got a little bit tired of all of the insurance and the different things, and just wanted to look at something new. And then I got into nuclear pharmacy. I had a friend that did that I went to college with. Then he went straight into it out of pharmacy school and opened a business, and then he brought me into that. And we did that in Alabama, and I had ownership of a nuclear pharmacy with him that we opened a couple of those over there for a few years, and then decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. I got recruited by Mallinckrodt, the company we were talking about earlier, to move, and that's when I came to Dallas in 2002 to manage the nuclear pharmacy there, and I did that from 2002 until 2019, and then I got back into clinical work after that. The hours in nuclear is crazy, on call, working overnight hours and rotating shifts, and it was just a lot for me to deal with. I just got to the point where I didn't want to do that much anymore, and wanted to get back into patient care, so I had to learn back over all the clinical stuff all over again, when I got out of nuclear, because that was a pretty long time doing it. But anyway,
so I've heard of Walgreens, I've heard of CVS. What's a nuclear pharmacy?
Well, you know what a cardiac stress test is, right? You know what a PET scan is? So it's mainly for diagnosis, not treatment and therapy. There are some exceptions to that. There are therapeutic radiopharmaceuticals that are used, to treat certain types of cancers and different things like that. Like the most common one is to give radioactive iodine for, thyroid cancer or, hyperthyroidism and whatnot. So we would make those kinds of things. So mainly you're just making radio tracers that are injected into patients for scanning purposes. And you basically manipulate radioactive substances so that they're distributed into the body of the patient to where you want to see. If you want to see their biliary system and their gallbladder, you would give them a drug, with that. If you're looking at their myocardium and their heart function and doing all that, it would be a different, thing. And one of the coolest things we did in that was white blood cell labeling, leukocyte labeling. So you would do that. You get a blood sample from the patient, you spin it down, you isolate the leukocytes, then you use a drug with an isotope to get the radiation inside of the white blood cells, and then prepare it, send it back, and inject it into the patient, and then basically you put them under a gamma camera, and you can watch where the leukocytes go. It's good for infection of unknown origins, inflammations of unknown origins, patients with arthritic, joint conditions. If you do that, it's going to accumulate in the joint wherever the issue is. So anyway, that was kind of a cool thing that we were doing in there. So It's a very important part of medicine, diagnostic wise. So anyway, the biggest challenge from my perspective on that was working in a lab and being able to like be in the Dallas area and cover the whole metroplex with every cardiologist, imaging center, hospital in the area, and being able to get these products made and out and in the patient within a 12-hour period, because that's what you're dealing with. Things are going to expire in 12 hours. They're only good for that long. So it creates a logistical nightmare for you if you can think about that. But anyway.
I'm kind of imagining you in like a yellow garb,
That's what I was saying.
like Homer Simpson with
Right.
the red,
Yep. Things
green
glowing.
titanium.
Yeah.
Well, you certainly have to protect yourself. So the focus becomes on protecting yourself from the radiation, because whatever dose you're giving the patient, you're making up batches that you're giving to hundreds of patients. So, but you're not taking it internally into your body like you're giving it to the patient. You're only being exposed to it externally, But it's still a concern.
You're still alive 41 years later.
Right.
Well, there's actually been studies about this, by the way, that low level gamma radiation is supposedly beneficial for your health. There's been a number of studies that have kind of shown that, because a lot of workers in that industry, for whatever reason, don't tend to get cancer for whatever reason. So, there's some studies out there that reveal that, but.
Well, it worked
Anyway.
for the Hulk. So
Yeah.
maybe there's something to it.
one of the coolest stories I tell about that was, you can imagine when you have that kind of business and you're putting radioactive materials into transport. You got so much regulation going on there. You got the Board of Pharmacy, the Radiation Control, you got the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and biggest one is the Department of Transportation. If you're carrying hazardous material, you have to train your drivers and spend a lot of time doing that. And part of that and managing that pharmacy, one of the things I had to do was like contact all of the police and fire chiefs all over the metroplex and send them a letter to say, hey, this is what we do. This is what's in our vehicle. If they're in an accident and you encounter it, these are the things that you do. These are the people you call, and so forth and so on. And but even and I would go out and meet with police chiefs in particular for that reason. But even with doing all of that, occasionally something would happen. You have a vehicle in a wreck, and they would freak out because in the back of the vehicle you got all these packages with radiation symbols all over them. So, and they would be like, "Oh my God!" They're thinking
They got a nuclear bomb back there.
What
right?
did
And
you
really
order from Amazon?
The threat is pretty minimal unless there's a spill, right?
Right.
That's why they're contained, and the way we packaged them, the chances of that you could crash into the back of the vehicle and smash all of the containers, and it likely wouldn't cause a spill, but they wouldn't know that. So, one time we had a wreck over in HEB Bedford area, and the police chief made the decision over there to close a freeway, in spite of calls to me and me telling them don't do that, and they ended up calling a hazmat radiation team to drive up out of Austin. So they basically it happened at like 4 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
They had the freeway shut down until afternoon because of that.
Wow.
Because they didn't, and I'll go to the scene, and they wouldn't let me anywhere near it. I'm like, if you just let me to the vehicle
That's my stuff.
within 5 minutes, I'll have it cleared up, and you can move all this stuff off the freeway and open the freeway. No, we got to do this, we got to do that. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't listen to me, and so the hazmat team showed up. I had to wait out there for hours and hours. The hazmat team showed up from Austin, and they got out there and looked, and when they got done, they were pissed because they were like, you called us out here for this?
You tried to tell them.
So anyway, every time after that I interacted with the police chiefs, I told them that story, so that wouldn't hopefully never happen again. But anyway.
Do you have to have special training to be a nuclear pharmacist?
Yes, you do. You have to become what's called an authorized user, which means you can go through a certificate program, University of Southern California, Purdue University, which is where I went for mine. After graduating pharmacy school, you can enroll there, and you can do, 90% of it is online, but then you have to go to the university and stay there for like a month. And then you have to get hired by somebody before you can get full certification. You got to do, 500 hours under authorized user training you, in addition to all of the other stuff that goes into it. But
What are some of the ways that your profession has changed over the years?
Oh, wow. Well, in the dark ages, when I was typing, first of all, I was typing prescriptions on a little electric typewriter. A few years before that, they were using manual typewriters, not even electric ones. So you'd have to type all those prescription labels. And so pharmacy in those days was more of a kind of count and pour, lick and stick. That was like what they used to say in pharmacy school, because you're counting pills, pouring liquids, and typing labels and licking them and sticking them on a bottle. Which you weren't literally doing that, but that's kind of how things were done back in those days. When I first was trained, pharmacists were trained to not really question doctors at all. We were just starting to move into this clinical age that they're calling, now the physicians need to be oversighted just like everybody else, right?
Somewhere along the way, we started getting dumb. we needed some extra help.
So a lot of pharmacists, like in my era, were ill prepared for that. Whenever the OBRA 90, like that was when all of that really started. The OBRA law is what it was called. In 1990 was passed that basically said that, pharmacy now has to do a number of things, provide information to the patients, provide oversight of all prescriptions and do, utilization reviews and all those kinds of things, the things that are standard of practice now. It's evolved from being mainly, a physical counting pills and sticking and giving to the patient and giving them very little information, to now you train technicians and people like that to do all of those functions, and you're doing reviews, clinical oversights, counseling patients, providing them with information and doing those kinds of things. So, which that's a positive. It's a very positive thing. But it's moved away from the days of compounding, although compounding has become more prevalent in some areas. But, we at training in pharmacy school, they trained us how to make all kinds of ointments, creams, paste, suspensions, you name it. So now they've kind of moved away from that, because now if you're doing compounding, you got to go back and kind of learn that or take a course or whatever, because they don't really provide that anymore in pharmacy school. So it's just a big change in focus, I think. We certainly learned a lot, but one of the biggest things that's changed, and I wanted to research this when I got back into clinical a few years ago, because I had been out of clinical pharmacy. I was saying that's such a narrow field of nuclear there for a number of years, and I was astonished when I started getting back into it how many drugs had hit the market since I had gotten out of it. So anyway, I was just curious. In 1984, when I graduated pharmacy school until now, the number of, and this doesn't even count over-the-counter stuff, prescription drug products that are on the market now, it's like 500 times factor. There's like 500 times more drug products on the market now than there were when I graduated pharmacy school.
Wow.
So
well, I'm so glad for that, because we're all so much healthier.
Right.
Wow.
So the knowledge base, it's you have to. It's the kind of profession, much like medicine, where you've got to keep on top of things, because stuff is changing all the time.
That's what I was going to say. I think probably a big part of the transition behind pharmacy moving from more of a technician to more of a clinician is the advancement of the prescription drugs and the number of prescription drugs and how they interact and affect the patient. I mean, that's probably too much for a whole person care approach that maybe a medical doctor would practice just to keep up with. I mean, certainly we know a lot about it, and we should know a lot about it, but to really know the details of each drug, I think it's critical to have a pharmacist on board.
The body of knowledge there has gotten too large for any one person to know 100%. Like, there's no way, even practicing pharmacy for as long as I have, there's no way I can know every aspect of every drug out there and every potential interaction, all of those things. And that's why, involved from the clinical side of things, is you're constantly having to educate yourself, and you're having to, depending on the focus of your practice, in the rehab setting, our focus is a little bit more narrow than what you would be out in the world, so to speak, in a pharmacy. But still, there's always stuff comes up on a regular basis. It's wow, I hadn't seen that drug in a long time. I don't even remember, what we were doing with it. What was it for? What was it this or that? So you're constantly having to educate yourself. And that's why, the other thing is, in my practice, what I'm trying to do now is, and what I communicate to my patients all the time, we went from this culture of medicine that has been ingrained in our society of there's something wrong with me. The doctor is going to give me a pill, and I'm going to take that, and it's going to fix it. And basically, I don't have to do anything, right? I'm sick. The doctor's going to fix me. That's kind of the mindset. I know that's how I was raised. My parents think that we're thinking that way, and that's what leads to all these folks that have, you have hypochondriac behavior and all these kinds of things like that, because patients need to understand that nobody is going to own and protect their health and safety more than them. Then they should be owning their health care, trying to get more information about why they're doing things, what's going on with their bodies, and other things that they can do besides just take a pill. There's the therapy aspect that we know is important, right? We see that all the time with pain management, right? Patients come into the hospital and they're taking X amount of pain medicine, way more. When they get therapy and participate and do the things that they need to do there, range of motion, all those things that are involved with that, they don't need the pain medicine nearly as much. Hopefully not at all in a best case scenario. So,
Yeah, I think when it comes to opioids, especially, there's this concept of opioid hyperalgesia syndrome. Obviously, you develop an opioid dependence over time. So when someone comes in and they're like on, let's say, 200 oral morphine equivalents, just a ton of opioid, and they're still rating their pain 8, 9, 10 out of 10. And they're like, well, I need my pain medicine. Well, it looks like to me it's not doing anything for you.
Right.
So I'm able to actually slowly over time wean them down to like maybe 50 or 60 oral morphine equivalents, 25% of what they were on. And oftentimes their pain levels are lower as well, or the same. So then the question becomes, well, did you really need all that extra medicine you're taking every day that's turning your brain to mush and making it so you can't poop for like 3 weeks? There's got to be better ways than that, for sure.
absolutely. And just having the education of that, because many of these drugs, and a lot of people don't know, older folks like myself know that when a lot of these drugs hit the market, the abuse potential, all the addiction problems that occur with them was downplayed quite a bit. Most famously with the Oxy, Purdue Pharma case and all that, went around that. But many drugs over time have come out and been deemed safe or non-addictive or whatever when they hit the market under initial testing. You test something over a few years in a clinical trial, you're not going to get the full picture that you're going to get after 10 or 15 years of clinical use, right? So that
Except the COVID vaccine. That was
That
was
ready to
well
rock.
tested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they had to do something, but anyway, you see my point. I was telling you that earlier, when diazepam, the drug Valium, hit the market it hit the market maybe about 8 or 10 years before I got out of pharmacy school. But when it first came out, it wasn't even considered, it was considered to have zero abuse potential. It was not a controlled substance. The drug company was going around giving samples to pharmacists, doctors to give it out, and they were writing prescriptions like candy for that stuff.
So this was a little bit before my time, but it's true that reps would bring hydrocodone and oxycodone sample packets
Absolutely.
uncontrolled to the clinic, and anybody could just take one?
Well, even when they were controlled substances in the beginning, like I know when the first hydrocodone product was Vicodin. That was the first one to hit the market, and when it was released, the way that the laws were with regard to samples and whatnot, the drug manufacturers could go around to doctors' offices and give them box full, huge amounts of samples of Vicodin, but with a signature, and they weren't having to really keep track too much about where it was going or what they were using. The doctors could just give it out to their patients without really much documentation going on or anything like that. There's the thing, then you fast forward after it was out, and 10 years later you've got records of all these ER visits. You've got records of negative patient outcomes with all of the pitfalls of addiction and all the things that go with it, right? That start coming to light, and then now the body of information changes, and then of course you have the government has to they have to do something about these problems, right? So that many times the fix is worse than the problem sometimes, if they go too far and and that's what we see more now because of the restricted access to opioids and how it's so much harder for patients and whatnot. Obviously we want to protect patients' lives and protect them from themselves and things like that, but sometimes it's overly restrictive in certain cases, certain patients, as depending on what they're, terminal cancer patients, there's lots of reasons why you would say it's okay to give, long-term opioids. But, all what that typically does, in my view, that's, I'm not saying it shouldn't be controlled, but when you put all these strict encumbrances and blockades, if you will, to patient access to their things, it makes it difficult for them, and a lot of them suffer and have issues as a result.
Well, it's hard for a clinician to keep track of the different regulations. I mean, you have the federal government you have to answer to, then there's the state government, and then there's the patient's particular insurance company, then there's the patient's particular pharmacy, right? So they all may have different limits of quantities and durations and medications and all these things that you don't know what it's going to be until you send it, and then they kick it back. So, and then that's just one aspect. And then a lot of times they're out of stock, or you have to switch pharmacies, even though you're not supposed to switch pharmacies, just to get your patients treated. I mean, a lot of times patients think, oh, it's just a matter of, clicking the button and you can get a prescription. Well, actually, not quite that easy. There's a lot to consider when it comes to getting a patient their medicine,
Absolutely. So it's just a lot of, I think the thing about the law from a clinician standpoint is, like you said, you have all these different levels of regulation. And, I was always taught in pharmacy school, and I know this is a pharmacy thing that's, the standard of care or whatever. Whatever is the more strict law is what you got to abide by. So whatever state you're working in and what the laws are, a lot of things are different. If your state law is more strict than the federal, then you have to stick with the state law. Conversely, if the state law says, oh, it's okay to do this, but the federal law is more strict, you have to follow the federal law in that. And it just sets up a lot of gray area or, misunderstanding of what exactly you're supposed to be doing, if that makes sense.
A lot of people don't understand this because I think, like you mentioned earlier, where you mentioned that the pharmacist pretty much just has to do what the doctor says, right? That was kind of the old way of doing things. Now, actually, pharmacists have a huge role and a legal obligation even to make sure that there's appropriate prescribing, the patient's getting the right meds, etc. So it's not the old days anymore where, well, you're the doctor, why can't you just make the pharmacist give me my medicine? They didn't go to medical school. Well, actually, they went to pharmacy school, which is pretty difficult. So, plus, they could go to jail just the same way I could go to jail.
Well, exactly, because the regulatory environment that we're under with the Board of Pharmacy, DEA, whatnot, every practitioner out there, whether they're a physician or a doctor or even nurses for that matter, anyone that's handling controlled substances are, under the microscope, so to speak, and can be scrutinized, and you have to be cognizant and aware of the things that you're doing daily and try to make sure you're doing what's right for your patients, but doing that within the context of what the law says you can and can't do. And there is a lot of concern by practitioners at times about their welfare, their licensing, and so forth if they don't. So many times you get caught between that rock and a hard place of what is right for my patient, but I have these constraints on me, so to speak. And I think it's important for patients to understand that, because whenever they're having to be told no, they can't fill their prescription, whether it's from the pharmacist or the physician or whoever it is, there's always a reason for it. Many times the clinician's hands are tied on that. They have to follow whatever the regulations are. And sadly, like so many laws are written by, politicians, attorneys, and people like that. They're not typically written by, laws that govern doctors are not typically written by doctors or pharmacists or so forth. So what that does is that creates situations, and there are things in our laws that don't make a lot of sense sometimes because of that, because they hadn't considered when the law was drafted, all the ramifications of it. It's an ever evolving process, I think, but it's just, the main thing, patients and, the clinicians need to have what's in the best interest of the patient at the forefront of everything they're doing. And that's what we try to do.
What can a patient do that would give you some red flags? Like maybe this person shouldn't be getting this prescription right now.
Oh, there's a number of things. Obviously, trying to get refills not within the time frame of when they should have been, based on the prescription, with the, just if they're supposed to take it 4 times a day as needed or whatever, then they shouldn't be using more than 4 a day, right? And if they're using more than that, that's a red flag. Other things is just behavior of the patient when they come in. If they can be acting strangely. I've seen that a few times. Typically, patients tend to get a little irate when you tell them no about filling their prescriptions, especially if it's opioids and things like that. But there's any number of things could be red flags. But patients need to be aware. Pharmacists, when they're filling their prescriptions, they have to log into the state database to see how many controlled medication prescriptions they've gotten filled and where they've gotten them, and they're looking for patterns. Your license is under scrutiny from you being the gatekeeper, so to speak,
Right.
to identify, potential for abuse, diversion, and things like that. There are lots of unscrupulous people in our world. Unfortunately, there's lots of people that go around to doctors and just to get the medication, and they're not even taking it themselves. They're doing it for profit reasons, or who knows what the reasons are. I've seen all of it, and it just when you're in that situation, for instance. One time, and this many, many years ago, even before the laws were the way they are, I had a situation where a patient was getting a bunch of hydrocodone get filled over and over again. And unbeknownst to me, the pharmacist, the patient's wife was a nurse that worked in a doctor's office. And when I would call to do verifications, that was before we had the PDP where you could look up and see all of that. So you were dependent on calling the doctor's office to making sure the prescription was legitimate and things like that. But every time I would call to check on this, they would say okay. But every time I called, I was talking to the same nurse, the doctor's nurse. I never was talking to the doctor because she was delegated to do that. Well, come to find out, the nurse, this was her husband that was doing this, and she was okaying all the prescriptions for him. So here I was in the bad situation of I had filled 20 or 30 hydrocodone prescriptions for this gentleman that were not legitimate, that the doctor never authorized, and I filled all of those for that patient. So basically, diversion was occurring, right? So my license was on the line as a result of that, even though I filled the prescriptions in good faith. These are the types of situations you can get yourself in. And I probably would have never known had it not be somehow I had to call one time, and the nurse got called away, and they actually put the doctor on the phone. And when I told him what I was calling for, he was like, "What?" And then he wanted all the detail, and then he was telling me, absolutely not. Well, come to find out, when the doctor found out that, the first thing he did was call the sheriff's office and had them both arrested. So, anyway, that got me off the hook, so I was glad it worked out that way. But, we all had to go give depositions and go to court and do all of that in the wake of that. And that was not a fun thing from a pharmacist standpoint. You see that, and it can make you gun shy, so to speak, if you think about it. Make you paranoid about, well, every time I'm filling a narcotic prescription, is somebody trying to get over on me? So anyway, those are the kinds of things that, patients they have no concept of what's going on and some of the reasons they get told no, or why someone is scrutinizing what they do as closely as they do.
And pharmacists can even unite in a community and decide not to fill a prescription from a certain physician.
Well, yeah, if they feel like the physician is not, legitimate, or not, their practice is not legitimate. And I've seen this before. There was early in my career, I was doing some relief work for a friend of mine that owned a pharmacy, and I was just working in there one day a week. And I would go in there, and there was a doctor the doctor's office was right by the pharmacy. All day long, I was filling the same 3 prescriptions, Tussie and neck suspension, which is hydrocodone, Demerol, like 100, tablets of Demerol, and, like Valium or Xanax or something like that. And it would just be one patient, one right after the other. And the doctor was not even seeing the patients. He was basically just saying, you pay me X amount of money, and then here's your prescriptions. And that was going on. And,
He must have had some pretty bad student loans.
I don't know. Well, I don't know what the deal was, but you call up the board of pharmacy, you call the DEA, and they tell you, "Oh yeah, we're investigating them." That was a time that happened. Something that happened to me that I was shocked because when I called the board of pharmacy and the DEA, I'm thinking they're going to tell me, "Don't fill that guy's prescriptions ever again." That's not what they told me. They told me fill all of them and keep all your records. Separate all your records in the pharmacy and keep tabs of them because that's the only way we're going to be able to mount a case against them. So they wanted the pharmacy to keep filling them for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So the pharmacy owner was like, "Yeah, I'll just make some money off of it while I'm at it, if I'm going to be dealing with that." But they had to do that for 6 months or a year, which was shocking how long it had to go on before they finally shut the doctor down and arrested him.
That's the lesson there. There's no warning that you're coloring outside of the lines. They let you color enough until they can prove it and take you away.
Well, right, and they're going to make sure they can prove it before they waste the court's time or bother trying to do that. But stuff happens.
That's crazy.
It's certainly one of the most highly regulated industries in the world, probably next to the airline industry alone.
But you know what? People still push the boundaries.
They do.
I mean, professionals. Right now, look what goes on with, weight loss medications and compounding, Ozempic and different, semaglutide. Even there's ads all over the TV about it. Some of that's kind of in the gray areas of the law if you research it.
Actually, I don't know anything about that. Tell us some more.
Well, like all these semaglutide clinics, popped up with doctors doing that for weight loss. And, what had occurred was there was a raw material shortage. And the way that here's some of the gray area of our pharmacy laws. FDA says, okay, if we have a drug out on the market and it's in good supply, and it has a patent on it, then no one can just like acquire the raw material and compound a drug that's on patent, not legally anyway. However, if we have a situation where there's a shortage for whatever reason, and this is what happened with Ozempic, there was a drug shortage. The manufacturer could not get enough raw material and manufacture it fast enough to meet the growing demand, not because, if they were just treating diabetics, which was all the on-label use at the time, all of this weight loss stuff started popping up before they even developed the Wegovy, which is the same drug. Anyway, long story short, a lot of compounding pharmacies took hold of that and realized that was a loophole for them. If they could acquire the raw material, then they can compound it and sell it legally. Because of the shortage. And that shortage lasted, for a year and a half or something like that. And so what you had during that time was you had pharmacies popping up all over that all they were doing was compounding semaglutide injection. And they were selling it to the doctor's office. They were selling it to spas. They were getting prescriptions and selling it to patients. And then here you go. Now there's a suit being filed by the manufacturer now to try to get injunctions to shut all of that down. But there are still a number of pharmacies out there that are still compounding stuff. So the thing with the compounding, you have to compound it. It has to be a shortage. And also, whatever you're compounding has to be medically necessary to be different in some way. Like, I'll give you an example. Now they're doing semaglutide sublingual tablets. They're being compounded, right? Because now, what is it, Rybelsus? That's the brand name oral form of semaglutide, right? So they decided, well, if they can get their doctor locally to say that it's medically necessary for a patient to have a sublingual tablet because of absorption or stomach issues, then we can sell sublingual semaglutide. And they're doing it. So these are the kinds of things that pop up, and they'll do that, and they'll sell it and make money off of it for a period of time. And if the regulators get involved, they'll just close the pharmacy if they start getting investigated, and then they'll go apply for a license in a different town and do it all over again. Same thing that the pill mill people do. They go and pop up a pharmacy. They do pill mills to get, divert large quantities of controlled substances into the black market and whatnot, and they're going to make a ton of money in a year or so. By the time regulators start investigating them, doing all the things they got to do to arrest them or shut them down or do all that, they'll just close the pharmacy before that happens. And it happens over and over again. So,
wow.
I know. So it's incredibly easy. It cracks me up how we have all these laws and they're so stringent on practitioners for doing things and, scrutinizing, prescribing habits of the prescriber, scrutinizing, filling habits of the pharmacist and whatnot, while at the same time, basically anybody in any state in the United States can get a pharmacy permit. They don't have to be a pharmacist. All they have to have is they can't have a criminal history that, mainly that's drug related. They can have some criminal history as long as it doesn't involve drugs, right?
Wow.
If it involves drugs, they can't get a permit. But the thing is, anybody can do that. You don't have to be a pharmacist, and you can get a DEA permit too. You can get a DEA license without being a pharmacist. Now, granted, you got to hire a pharmacist to work in the store, and mind the store, and so to speak, to be able to legally sell anything. But that's what happens. These criminal enterprises do that, and if they get criminal record and they can't do it, they just get a family member. They'll get their wife or their cousin or their aunt or somebody they know, whatever. They'll fill out all the paperwork and just use their name and identity and get it, and it happens.
There are still pill mills to this day existing throughout the country. How is that possible with all of the oversight that exists?
That's a great question. I wish I had the answer.
Let's pretend to start a pill mill. How would we do it?
Well, you would get a pharmacy permit. You would apply for a pharmacy permit first. You have to get the pharmacy permit, which requires you to have background checks and you would have to physically have a pharmacy to be inspected. So
a doctor couldn't do it by himself or herself. They would have to be in cahoots with a pharmacist.
Well, you could do everything. You don't necessarily have to have a pharmacist just to do the application process and all that. But before you can open the doors. But you could acquire a building, you could be leasing something, you could put up fixtures, you could get computer systems, you could do whatever, and then once you get the pharmacy permit, you can apply for a DEA. You can have all that in place and still not have a pharmacist hired.
But every prescription of hydrocodone is on a federal database, on a state database, rather, right? It's being monitored every time it's filled. So you would think that there would be certain patterns coming out of certain locations.
You would think, but they're getting more sophisticated all the time. They get, they'll get patient databases of, or that they use, and they're, not actually, getting the prescriptions to the actual person, right? A lot of this, we talk about identity theft and things like that. That's a lot of what identity theft is used for, those kinds of things, not among other things. But, if you can get a roster of people where you have their dates of birth, you have their social security number, you have their name, and if you can get their insurance information, even better, right? If you can even bill the insurance company for it. They've busted a number of these pill mills, and they were billing insurance companies for the prescriptions for the controlled substances that they were diverting into the black market. Insane. So they weren't even they were getting paid to do it for years and not getting caught. Which wow. I don't understand how they can get away with it. Like you said, you would think that they would do that. I think it's a function of how many pharmacies are in the country and across the nation compared to how many inspectors they have and how often they can really get around and really do investigations. You talk about in the state of Texas, I don't know how many pharmacies we have in the state of Texas, but it's a large number. And you may have 15, 20 inspectors to cover the whole state. One inspector may have 150 pharmacies to oversight, or more maybe. I don't know what the ratio is, but the point being is they typically don't get around and inspect you. They try to do it annually, but a lot of times it's every 2 years. Now they'll go sooner if they have some reason, something hits their radar, or they get reports from patients or whomever.
One of my attendings was on the Texas Medical Board along the way. And he mentioned, just don't be the one that prescribes the most. If you prescribe the most, they'll be the ones that are looking at you.
Okay. You can stay in the race. Just don't take the lead. Yeah.
Don't take the lead. Yeah. Right.
Just kind of stay in the middle of the pack. You'll be good.
Nobody really knows what that lead is, so you're always wondering, But Jose, did they have a pharmacist dedicated to the Rangers? Do you know? Maybe a preferred pharmacy that they would use?
Yeah. I don't remember which one, but I want to say Walgreens.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever was closest to the stadium.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you guys didn't have stocks of medication at the training facility? Or
no
anything?
dispensary?
Yeah, no, we did. There was a time where everything was at the stadium, and they had it there so that the doctor can get it whenever. Um, I want to say the last 10 years, they started to cut back and have certain things that were, like the cortisone and simple things like
Right.
that, but more of the other stuff, yeah, it was, they took that away.
Well, I remember reading, being from Louisiana, I'm a huge Saints fan, so I was like into the Saints, and they had all of this bounty gate thing, and they got their coach got put on probation, all that. Well, in the NFL investigation of that, I had read a story that was reporting about how many dosing units of hydrocodone and other painkillers that they had at the training facility, and that it's likely that way for all of the professional sport teams.
Yeah, and
I was curious about it.
there's been cases of athletic trainers injecting the players.
Nice.
There was, I know some.
Speaking of a friend,
Yeah, I know a case.
I know a guy. He's
with
good
a
looking, bald, likes to wear black.
No, that wasn't me though.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, you look at the amount of money that professional sports in as a business, how much is at stake with there. I think anytime you have any kind of situation where there's a lot of money to be made, so to speak, there's the potential for all of that to go on, right?
Absolutely.
So they're definitely vested in keeping the players on the field and whatnot, whatever that takes, right? So. It was interesting to me to read that. I was going, well, do they have to have a pharmacist on staff to maintain their drug inventories at the facility, or who is oversighting that? I mean, a doctor can do it. Doctors can have stocks of medication in their practice.
I was told never to do that.
Well, it's because you
It's a
open
major
up.
liability.
It is, and it opens yourself up to scrutiny. That's going to put you right to the top of the oversight list because.
Even if you're doing it correctly,
Yeah.
that's the whole thing.
I know.
If now there's money to be made in it, there's going to be a question.
And it's like anything else. Doctors for years would have office use, controlled substances in their office all the time for use for whatever reason. And historically, especially back in the day when I first got into it, they wouldn't have records of things. They didn't do a very good job of record keeping of all of the things and who they're giving what to, and just being able to account for it. And that's a huge. If you do that as a doctor, you essentially need someone keeping track of all of that, right? Whether it be a nurse or a nurse practitioner or a pharmacist or whomever, or unless you're going to do it yourself, which I doubt you have time for.
Have you ever heard of pharmacies getting robbed?
Oh yeah, all the time. All the time. I've been fortunate enough to not ever have had the pharmacy I was working in get robbed, either actively or most of them occur after hours, break-ins and that kind of stuff.
I suppose they're there looking for atorvastatin and cholesterol medications, things of that nature.
Definitely not. Although they might be, trying to get some semaglutide these days at the prices they could get for it on the black market. So
Summer's
it's
coming.
Follow the money, right?
Get ready.
It's all about the money, wherever they're going to make the most. But yeah, I've known some pharmacists that own pharmacies that had them broken into. With technology and security systems being a lot more advanced and a lot more, back when I first got into it, pharmacies didn't even have them. Most of them didn't have a security system at all. They locked the door and that was pretty much it. They might have a safe inside, but it's almost worse in a pharmacy to put all of the controls into one area into a safe, because then if someone's breaking in, all they got to do is break into that or take it off or whatever. If you have everything dispersed throughout the to where they don't necessarily know where it is, especially if you're creative about how you're storing it, if that makes sense, then then if someone breaks in, they don't have to go through every shelf in there trying to find what they're looking for.
Wow.
Which, so that's one strategy that pharmacies came up with. And we're not going to just put them in a cabinet under the counter with a lock, so they can just grab the cabinet and tear it open or do whatever, and they've got everything, right? They're going to have to go through and either take everything or and sort through it later, or they're going to spend a lot of time trying to find what they're looking for, right?
Is this why the pharmacists stand like 2 feet higher over everyone? Is that a security thing?
I think it's probably a standpoint of them being able to see
The rest of the
potential.
store.
Because I mean, think about it. If you're in there, somebody's going to come in there at gun and rob you at gunpoint, which certainly has happened.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be finding it out, or you would like to be able to see it before
See it
they're
coming,
standing
huh?
right in your face,
Exactly.
right? But I was always told and trained, if that ever happens, just give them whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Fortunately, I'm very fortunate. Never had to deal with that because I'm sure, I don't know any personally, but I'm sure there are pharmacists that if that happened to them, they would probably be very much wanting to get out of the business, because if you're going to have someone attacking you with a gun on a regular basis, why would you want to continue doing that, right?
Absolutely.
So.
What is one of the craziest stories that you recall looking back on your career where you say, wow, I can't believe that happened?
Oh, wow. There's a number of things. Do you want it specific to controlled substances, or it can be anything?
Anything?
Well, I did have a doctor early in my career that ordered a large dose of IV penicillin for a baby that both the nurse and myself was questioning, because it was way over the scheduled dosing limit. And the nurse refused, pharmacy refused to prepare it. And this guy was such a diva that he decided that he would just, if the pharmacy should dispense the product to the floor, and he came into the hospital and prepared it and gave it to the baby.
Wow.
Unfortunately, there was no negative consequence, but the potential was definitely there for that to happen, and he did that. So that was pretty crazy. I'll tell you another one in my hometown. This is tell you how controlled substances have changed. Went to work in my hometown. Remember I told you. So my middle name is Pike, P-I-K-E. Well, the doctor who delivered me, his last name was Pike, and he was like the hometown doctor where I grew up. And he delivered me, so he was best buds with my parents and stuff, so I knew him very well. So anyway, the first week I got there into my hometown, I started filling prescriptions, and I started seeing all these prescriptions in the files, where he had written prescriptions for Valium and mostly for benzos. Some of them were for like Tylenol with codeine and things like that. But he would put PRN refill on there, right? And that was something that used to be a thing, especially with non-controls. Now that's like defunct. The law says if the doctor says PRN refills, that means no refills, because it's not, allowed to do that. But anyway, basically, so after, I started, every time a prescription refill would come in, and now they've done, the law was 5 refills in 6 months, right, for a controlled substance. Not Schedule 2, obviously. But things like hydrocodone was a Schedule 3 at that time, and so you could have refills on hydrocodone. But anyway, he would have this PRN refill, so I'd call up to his office and get authorization for a new prescription. And so I called over there and did that, and then, about an hour later, had another one called and got authorization for the second one. And, a little bit more time went by. I called a third time, and I was speaking to his nurse, and then she was asking him. So when I called the third time and asked the nurse, she said, "Wait a minute, Dr. Pike wants to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." So he got on there, and he was really old at the time. He was probably 75 years old at the time, but he got on there and he said, "Jimmy Pike, when I write PRN refills on a controlled substance, that means that you refill that prescription until I call and tell you not to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. Don't call me with that ever again. I don't want to hear from you for that. Just if it says PRN, write a new prescription and fill it." Which, that scared the heck out of me when he said that, because here was it, friends. I knew him really well. He knew me since, watched me grow up and all of that. And I'm like, so what am I supposed to do? I go to the owner of the pharmacy. I didn't own the pharmacy. And he tells me, "Yep, that's what he wants us to do. We've been doing that for years." And I'm like, "So what does the Board of Pharmacy say about it?" And I was told, "Well, the Board of Pharmacy asked. We called and authorized every single one of them." Really? And you think that he's going to cover you on that? If if he's in trouble, is he going to cover you on that? And I was like, "I don't know, but that's what we're doing." So for about 4 more years, I worked in that pharmacy and did that over and over and over again, every day. And then luckily he retired. He got too old to practice and he retired, and that kind of ended that practice. But this just to show you, in those days, and nobody was going to question him. None of the medical board was not going to question him. The board of pharmacy was not going to question him. That, there was no oversight. Everything was still on paper. We didn't have databases of drug fills or any of that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of things that went on like that were, not best practices. I mean, how many people were getting addicted to controlled substances that he was prescribing in that way? So anyway, that wouldn't fly for 5 seconds now, right?
Right.
So, in fact, especially with Valium, because if you just see a prescription in retail now for Valium, that sends a red flag automatically, because there are other alternatives to use that are safer and cause less problems for patients, So it's not used that much anymore, as much as, it once was. But anyway, those are the kind of things that went on back in the day.
I was going to ask you, because like you had said about how there's 500 times more prescriptions out there. I was going to ask you, in your time, have you seen a drug it kind of was popular and it almost seemed like it was kind of going out of style, so to speak, and then all of a sudden it kind of had a resurgence? Because sometimes old becomes new, and new becomes Yeah,
I don't know what a good example of that is. I do know, do you ever use Demerol anymore? Meperidine? That used to be a big thing. It had Meprigan Forte, right? Or Fortis, Meprigan Fortis. That was Demerol and Phenergan, right? And they had injection. It was already combined. Then they took it off the market, and a lot of doctors were still going, well, we'll just have the pharmacy, or we'll just dispense the Phenergan and the Demerol separately, and then they can just draw it into a syringe and inject it, IM injections for that. So that went totally out of favor. I don't know. I haven't seen that in a number of years. So I guess people aren't using it at all anymore for whatever reason. There was another Demerol came out, and that was supposed to be the magic bullet from getting away from morphine, and it was so much better. It was orally absorbed. It was not. It didn't have near the addiction problems, not near the, or at least that's what they said. But it all. Over time, it proved to not be the case at all. It was every bit as much abused as any of the other opioids.
Do you see anybody abusing gabapentin?
I haven't personally encountered that, but I've read that some people do. So I don't know what they're getting out of it. I'm pretty surprised by that. But enough are doing it for some states to make it a controlled substance. Not in Texas. Same thing with pregabalin. Mm-hmm. That wasn't a control initially. They've made it Schedule 5, but somebody was abusing it, because if they weren't, why would the government say it needs to be controlled? And I think, I hope that it doesn't go federally. But if enough people are abusing it, if we have enough negative consequences for patients for maybe someone who is abusing it in large doses, who's to say? If they were to have a couple of patients die, but I don't know how much would they have to take? 10 grams?
We're already giving them the pharmacy.
Well, I know. What is the maximum dose? Like 4,800 or something like that now?
Yeah, I think 3,600.
36.
Of the gabapentin, yeah.
Yeah. But I guess somebody could abuse 5 grams at a time. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe so.
I don't know. Surely it doesn't matter what the drug is. There's eventually a toxic level of it. It doesn't matter what it is.
Exactly.
So,
Well, Jim, thank you for spending your Friday afternoon with us. Appreciate that.
No problem. It's been fun.
It has. For all of you watching, Jim is our friend. Pharmacy is our friend. They save us in many different ways, the physician and patient alike. So be kind to your pharmacist when you encounter them at the pharmacy. They're just there to help you. They're not there to make your life more miserable. Certainly not any more miserable than your doctor. So with that being said, have a great day.